What is Sharia really? The word that has been used to terrify people in the West for decades. The word that is misunderstood by most non Muslims and by many Muslims. The actual meaning, what Sharia actually is, what it contains, how it works, and what it is not, explained honestly. What does the word mean? Sharia in Arabic literally means the path to water, the road that leads to the source of life. In the desert context of Arabia, water meant survival. The path to water was not an imposition or a restriction, it was a lifeline. The word itself encodes the Islamic understanding of divine law, not as a cage designed to confine, but as a path toward what sustains and gives life to everything that walks it. What is Sharia? Sharia is the comprehensive framework of values, principles, and laws that Muslims derive from the Quran and the Sunnah, the practice of the Prophet. It covers theology, ethics, personal conduct, family law, commercial transactions, criminal law, and governance. But it is not, and this is crucial, a single fixed code of laws written down in one place that every Muslim must follow identically. Sharia is a vast and living tradition of legal reasoning and ethical reflection that has been developing for 1400 years. It encompasses four major Sunni schools of law: Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali, each with different methodologies and often reaching different conclusions on specific questions. It includes the Shia tradition with its own developed jurisprudence. It contains centuries of scholarly debate, commentary, disagreement, and refinement. It is as diverse and internally contested as any major legal tradition in human history. The sources of Sharia. Sharia is derived from four primary sources in Sunni jurisprudence: the Quran, the direct word of God; the Sunnah, the documented practices and sayings of the Prophet; Ijma, the scholarly consensus of qualified jurists on a specific question; Qiyas, analogical reasoning, applying the principles of established rulings to new situations. The Quran itself contains relatively few specific legal verses. Approximately 500 out of over 6,000 verses deal with law in any direct sense. The vast majority of the Quran is theological narrative, ethical guidance, and spiritual exhortation. Islamic law is built primarily through the sophisticated and deeply contested process of deriving principles from these sources, a process called ijtihad, independent legal reasoning, that has been the engine of Islamic jurisprudence since its earliest days. The purposes of Sharia. Classical Islamic legal theory identifies five fundamental purposes that Sharia exists to protect: the protection of life, the protection of mind and intellect, the protection of lineage and family, the protection of property, the protection of religion itself. These are called the maqasid al-Sharia, the objectives of Islamic law. Every legal ruling is evaluated against whether it serves or undermines these five Continuing objectives. The exploration of Sharia, what it actually regulates and what it does not, and how it functions in practice. What Sharia actually regulates. The popular image of Sharia in Western media focuses almost entirely on criminal law: amputation for theft, public flogging for alcohol consumption, stoning for adultery. This is the smallest and most contextually limited dimension of Islamic law, and treating it as representative of Sharia is like judging the entire American legal system by the existence of the death penalty. The overwhelming majority of Sharia addresses how to pray fast and perform Hajj, how to conduct business honestly, how to treat your family, how to write a will, how to enter a partnership, how to resolve commercial disputes, how to care for orphans, and how to treat neighbors. It is primarily a code of personal ethical conduct and civil regulation, not a criminal code. Sharia and women. One of the most misrepresented dimensions of Sharia is its treatment of women. The classical tradition contains real debates and real problems that honest scholars acknowledge. It also contains provisions that were revolutionary in 7th century Arabia and remain significant today. Under Sharia, women have the right to own property independently of their husbands. They have the right to initiate divorce through khul. They have the right to inherit. They have the right to retain their own name and legal identity after marriage. They have the right to their own earnings. The mahar, the gift given at marriage, belongs entirely to the wife and cannot be taken back. These rights were established in the 7th century, 1400 years before most of the world's legal systems recognized any of them. The relationship between Sharia and the state. This is one of the most contested questions in contemporary Islam. Sharia was developed primarily as a guide for individual Muslim conduct and civil society, not as a blueprint for a specific form of government. The question of how or whether Islamic law should be implemented by a state is a deeply contested debate with no single Islamic answer. Scholars have argued everything from the necessity of a full Islamic state to the compatibility of Islamic values with democracy to the position that Sharia was never designed to be imposed by state force at all, that law imposed by coercion on unwilling subjects contradicts the very spirit of a tradition built on freely chosen submission to God. What Sharia is not. Sharia is not a single fixed law code imposed identically on all Muslims everywhere. It is not medieval and unchangeable. Islamic jurisprudence has always been a living tradition that responds to new circumstances through ijtihad. And it is not fundamentally incompatible with human rights, though specific historical interpretations have been used to justify violations that mainstream contemporary scholarship increasingly challenges and rejects. The final part, the difficult questions about Sharia and what it ultimately means to understand it honestly. The difficult elements, any honest discussion of Sharia must acknowledge that classical Islamic jurisprudence contains elements genuinely difficult to reconcile with modern human rights standards. The classical legal position on apostasy carried the death penalty in specific circumstances under most schools of thought. Contemporary scholars, including Sheikh Yusuf al Qaradawi and Abdullah an Naim, have argued that this ruling was tied to early Islamic states, where apostasy was conflated with treason, and that in a modern context, freedom of conscience is fully compatible with core Islamic principles. This debate is ongoing, and the reformist position is gaining serious scholarly ground. The classical dhimmi system for non Muslim minorities provided legal protection, but also imposed limitations that would not be acceptable under modern equality standards. Muslim scholars today actively debate how to understand this in light of the Quran's insistence on justice. The treatment of women in some classical interpretations reflects the patriarchal context of the medieval world in which those interpretations were developed. Contemporary Islamic feminist scholarship has produced serious arguments from within the tradition for more egalitarian interpretations that are increasingly recognized within mainstream scholarship. The distinction between Sharia and its interpretations. The most important thing to understand about Sharia is the distinction between the divine principles themselves, which Muslims believe are eternal and just, and the human interpretations of those principles, which are the work of fallible scholars in specific historical contexts. The scholars who built this tradition, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam al-Shafi, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, were human beings who lived in specific times with specific cultural assumptions. Their brilliance was extraordinary, their humility was genuine, and one of them famously prefaced his rulings with, "This is my opinion and it may be wrong." That humility is part of the tradition they built. No Muslim scholar has ever claimed their interpretation of Sharia is identical to God's perfect law. Every school acknowledges it may be wrong on specific questions. The tradition has always contained internal criticism, ongoing reform, and continuous revision. What remains constant is the commitment to the 5 objectives: protecting life, mind, family, property, and religion, and the conviction that a society guided by those objectives would be more just and merciful. Sharia is not a finished product. It is a 1400-year living conversation about how to live justly before God, like if this changed your view. Share with someone who thinks they know what Sharia is. Subscribe, truth every day. I'm Noor. This is Islam with Noor. Thank you for listening.